Welcome back to Ambassador Notes. Today we're going to talk about the culture that your Muslim friends probably come from. Now, obviously, they're going to come from different cultures in different parts of the world, but I want to introduce a cultural concept that's kind of important, and it's that some societies are task-based society or task-oriented societies, and others are what we call event or relationship oriented. It's very highly probable that your Muslim friend is not from a task oriented society, but that you are. So, let me talk a little bit about the difference between these two cultures. And first, just the insight that I remember reading a long time ago that one of the great symbols of Western civilization is a clock and keeping track of time. As an American, even though I've lived overseas in many other countries for a long time, I value my time a lot. And one thing that I don't like is people wasting my time. So I'm very sensitive about this, although I've had to become more flexible with this over the years. So think of that clock as a symbol and think of like Big Ben in London kind of telling the time to the whole world. Or even think of the church bell that would be in, a little village out in the country, which would ring every 3 hours, just to tell the poor peasants who, of course, didn't have watches, what time it was of the day. So keeping track of time is very important for us. So in a task-oriented culture, which would be like the United States, Germany, most of Europe, um, we tend to value a person who gets the job done. Okay, gets the job done. And when we spend time socially with people, we tend to do it for shorter periods of time too. I remember when I was back in the States, I would meet someone for coffee, even people I had not seen in like 5 years, and we would be there for 45 minutes. And once 45 minutes had gone by, unless it was an extraordinary situation or whatever, it was like, okay, well, that was good. We had 45 minutes. We'll meet up again in 5 years. Event oriented cultures or relationship oriented cultures are very different. They do not focus as much on like how much time are we spending or even on punctuality because the focus is the event. And once the event has started, maybe that's like you going out for a picnic or taking your families on a hike together or taking your kids to play soccer and you're hanging out at the park chatting, whatever it is. Well, the event is what is important, and they will tend to hang out and spend time together a lot for a lot longer time. So, I mean, I remember hanging out with people over in the Near East for 5, 6 hours, and because it is the event that matters. And in those cultures, the event oriented or relationship oriented cultures, the identification of the person, it really comes from the group that they belong to. Westerners in the task oriented cultures, we tend to be very much more individualistic, whereas in the relationship oriented cultures, they tend to be much more focused on those relationships. So, all of this is just preface because one of the questions that I want to talk about is like, how do I manage to make time for my Muslim friends? This is a thing that a lot of our ambassadors in the United States and Europe too, but especially the States, have difficulty with. So I just have some really simple things for you to take into account. The first one is in the States, we tend to plan ahead. Like I plan ahead 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I'll meet you in 3.5 weeks for lunch, and that's perfectly normal. We're used to that. People from the relational cultures are not as used to that. So they tend to be more spontaneous, like, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? Whereas most Americans would never think about doing something like that. That also has to do with ministry. Usually in the States, who's going to preach on a given Sunday is planned out weeks or months ahead of time. Whereas in other cultures, you'll get a call and be like, oh, hey, are you going to be here 2 days from now on Sunday or even tomorrow? Would you mind preaching at our church? So these things have really practical implications as well in terms of not just relationships, but ministry and also business. If you've traveled internationally, you know this. So one thing that you can do in the States is to bracket out a time every week and let your Muslim friends know, hey, every Thursday evening, I like to whatever, go for a walk. I like to go to the park, and I would love for you to come with me. Another thing is that people eventually learn the customs of where they live. And it depends on the person, and it depends on how long they've been there, and it depends also really on how old they are. Young people tend to learn new habits and new customs much more easily and more quickly than older people. So you'll find some Muslims from, I don't know, India, Nigeria, uh, over in the United States, and they have very much adapted to that idea of we're going to get together at noon, we'll have lunch, and then we'll be gone by 12:50, so we can be back at our job. But it depends. But the point is, people get used to these things with time, usually. And the other thing, just don't be discouraged. If you make an appointment to hang out with a Muslim friend and they call and like, oh, I can't do it tomorrow, something else came up. Usually that's because of, again, they get their identity from the community and something happened in their family or with their circle of friends or their religious community and they had to cancel. And now a lot of Americans would not want to do that unless it was genuinely an emergency, like my child is in the hospital or something like that. But for them, their identity comes from their community. So don't be discouraged. They're not trying to be mean. It does not mean that they don't want to spend time with you. So again, just all of this to help you to bracket some time aside every week. Don't be discouraged. Make sure to make an appointment and then verify it the day before. That's the other thing, because if you make an appointment for a week or 2 weeks down the road, sometimes they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we didn't verify that, so we didn't, so I didn't go." You got to get used to some of this stuff. But again, as time goes on and people spend more and more time in the States or in Europe, they usually pick up on some of the cultural cues. So I hope that's helpful for you as you seek to spend time with your Muslim friends. This is the one of the greatest things that you can do. There's no substitute for spending time with people. Thank you for being an ambassador.